There was one philosophy that was the Kims. And so anything you do, therefore, for them, no matter what you go through, is good, including starvation and forced labor and, trafficking drugs and whatever.
Record-breaking $1.5 billion crypto heist.
There's a group called the Lazarus Group. The stuff that they've become sort of world leaders in is the cybercrime.
And I remember thinking, I want to be really clear that we are not purchasing these women.
Just had this conveyor belt of young women coming through Bureau 39.
China is so sick of dealing with the North Koreans.
The general power of the cartels to flood the US with drugs is just an all-time high. Fentanyl is becoming a huge issue.
I know you and I share this. Can we call it a passion for North Korea? Is that a thing? Is that an appropriate way to label it?
Yeah, we can say that. Yeah. It's healthy. Yeah.
I know that you covered some pretty interesting topics about North Korea. We talked about meth, which we'll get to a little bit later in the show. But I want to talk about the forced labor and the way that North Korea generates revenue. Because I think this is, that old cliche is follow the money, right? And so when you look at North Korea, people are like, how is this place still around? What's going on with it? How come they're causing trouble internationally? What's the deal? It really does all come down to the money. And a lot of people who look at North Korea, watch North Korea, sort of casually read the news about North Korea. Once you realize that North Korea is essentially not a quote unquote real country, in that it's more of a mafia that runs a country, kind of, it makes way more sense. Does that jibe with your understanding of the place?
Yeah, it's like when you drill down into it, there's not a lot below the surface in a way, because it's just the Kim family and then a bunch of very benighted poor people around them that happen to be within the borders of a country called North Korea. And the way that it makes money, like you said, there's just so much illicit stuff that goes on, and it pretty much has become the economy now, right? I mean, apart from some stuff going into China, which they're still kind of friends with, kind of not, because of some of the things I think we're going to talk about. But yeah, like you said, they just kind of use their people as capital now to try and get foreign exchange, which is kind of the gold dust for them, going back all the way to the 60s and 70s when Kim Il-sung, the godfather of this mafia, he basically ditches the Soviets and ditches the Chinese and their views of communism. He's like, I'm going to go full out despot, cult of personality. This is going to be a country that revolves literally around me and nothing else. And he calls it Kim Il-sungism, and it's and this is what we know as Juche, this cult of personality around the Kims, and sort of a communist royal family, if that even sort of makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't, right? Like communism, we're all equal. And the guy's like, by the way, I'm God, just to start. And it's like, okay. What?
Yeah. And they're like, I'm the king now. What? We can't do that. No. I've changed the rules. They're fine. It's fine now. It's okay. And so from the 70s onwards, he's just getting sanctioned to the hilt by the UN, by everyone. And the way that they figure out that they need to make money is by getting onto the black market. And so one of the ways they do this is by dispatching hundreds of thousands of their own people abroad to work in what essentially are kind of labor camps in the worst form of the word. And most of them go to the Soviet Union at the time. So they work in sort of logging, which is the typical one, out in the Russian Far East, which, if people don't know, Russia is way big, and it has a bunch of forests out in the middle of nowhere near Japan, which is crazy how sort of huge Russia is. And so the North Koreans kind of use these forced laborers. Basically, nearly all of their wage goes back into the state and into the coffers of the dictatorship, and so that continues, right? And then in the 1990s and the mid 1990s, especially, are kind of the breaking point for a lot of things in North Korea. You've got Kim Il-sung dies, his son Kim Jong-il, who people know from Team America and other very funny things. He basically leads the country through this insanely devastating famine. Crops fail. Many people die. I mean, it's only a country of 25 million people, and I think several million people die. And then they ramp up this illicit economy to try and just claw back anything like grain, gold, absolutely anything they can get their hands on. they will. And that's when this illicit activity, including the labor stuff, just really goes sort of crazy. And so like today you even see North Korea has laborers. I mean, I think it's like between 100 and 200,000 North Koreans working abroad these days. They're still in the logging camps out in the far east of Russia, all over the border. There's some people working in China. I think there was like a Vice documentary a few years ago where someone followed them all the way to sort of Western Poland.
Yes, in Poland, they found them,
yeah.
I think, welding ships or something like that, or doing some kind of welding thing. And I remember watching this because I think you might have sent it to me back then even too. This guy is welding and he has no eye protection and no protection at all. Like he's not even wearing anything but like gloves, I think, and a shirt, and like a regular shirt. And he's welding inside this enclosed space, no breathing apparatus, nothing. He just has on like a pair of crappy sunglasses. And it's this man is going blind, getting burned, and inhaling all of that, whatever that gas is from welding. And there was this Polish lady who was the labor agent, and they filmed her secretly, and she was just like, I don't care, it's illegal, screw it. And they're like, yeah, is this going to be a problem? And she's like, no one's going to find out. It's definitely illegal. They basically had her on camera being like, this is 100% illegal. We just don't care, and it's organized crime. And then it was shameless. I remember being amazed.
That's nuts.
She wasn't sugarcoating it. She wasn't like, no, this is all above board and totally fine, and they're not from there. No, it was just like, yeah, these are slaves. You can do whatever you want. It was just crazy to me.
Yeah. When you hear the stories of the guys who defect from the North as well, like the way that they describe Juche or this cult of personality is like there is no God, right? There are Kims. So you serve them, and serving them is like a kind of like semi-religious kind of like just an incredible honor, right? So people are out there laboring in the worst conditions imaginable on earth. And like you say, this guy with like no protection. I mean, it costs what? Like it must cost $1 to protect him, but that's too much for the Polish woman and him. And they're doing it because there is like a religious belief that the country is the Kims. And it's kind of insane. I met a guy actually in Seoul like a few months ago, and he was a defector. And the way that he described, he'd been pretty high up in the Politburo. He'd been like a propagandist. Now he works for one of those radio stations that broadcast stuff across the border, like, you know, Kim Jong-un's a dick.
Yeah,
basically,
he's a human
over and over
with a
again.
butthole that is working overtime or whatever they said in the movie, right?
Yeah. And the way that he described it was like, well, I didn't even know that religion exists or anything like philosophy existed. There was one philosophy, that was the Kims. And so anything you do, therefore, for them, no matter what you go through, is good, including starvation and forced labor and, you know, trafficking drugs and whatever. I mean, I used to live in Berlin. I've lived in Berlin for many, many years. And the North Korean embassy there was in the old East, obviously. And it ran a backpackers motel. So all these foreign backpackers coming through Berlin were heading to this like crappy motel in the middle of town, but it was run by the North Korean embassy, and it was funneling foreign exchange straight back to Pyongyang. And that kind of stuff.
How is that okay with, like, how does that fall under the diplomatic rules? Like, I know you can do pretty much anything out of an embassy, but running a business that's open to the public seems like one thing that might not totally qualify.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know, to be honest. I should know. My partner's a diplomat. I should figure this out. But they do this all over the world. Like there's a bunch of North Korean restaurants all over the world. There's one in Dubai,
Yes.
I think in Abu Dhabi.
I've been to one
all these
in Dandong, China.
Yeah, it's like there's I think they have all these like crazy dance shows, all these like traditional female dancers doing these like crazy sort of dances in traditional dress, and that's all funneling money back to the Kim. So it's like quite an impressive racket, and it's just so global, and it's happened for so many years now. It's so entrenched. I think the motel or the backpackers hotel in Berlin was shut down in the end, and I think a few more have shut down. I think also like a few of these restaurants and other businesses they had kind of shut down during COVID, and they haven't popped up because I think countries that they're in realize, this is a good excuse to kind of like, you know, shoo this thing on without anyone really making a stink about it. But it's still up and running. I mean, and there's far more naughty stuff happening than traditional dances and noodle soup. So it's crazy.
I'm curious about that because when I was in Dandong, first of all, I didn't know that there were like 100,000 North Korean workers in China and like 80,000 in Dandong. I didn't know that. I mean, now I assume that every Korean person I met in Dandong was actually from North Korea, which is probably a safe-ish assumption. We went to one of those, like, I forget what they're called, but it's the floor is heated and you like lay down in this sauna and you hang out. And I remember a lot of guys in there were Korean, and they were like Chinese Koreans, and there was a girl who was very pretty and young who was talking with us, and the guys that she was with were old enough to be her dad, and they were just laying around. And I remember thinking like, wow, there's so many Chinese Koreans, but now I'm like, were they Chinese Koreans or are these like North Korean dudes that work in this area or are from the somehow allowed by the regime, because they were really unfriendly, those guys. That could be anything. I mean, that doesn't mean anything. But the restaurant we went to, the women there were really interested in me and my friend because we showed them photos of our trip to North Korea that my friend had on his iPad. He's a photographer. So he had like really good photos of North Korea that they had also probably never seen, right? Something taken on a Sony, whatever, DSLR camera. They'd probably never seen a photo of North Korea like that, or very rarely, right? They had these crappy phones that barely took photos at the time. This is like 2011 or something like that. So we were showing them the photos and they were hanging out and talking with us and stuff like that. And these Chinese tourists came in and I thought like, oh, okay, now it's their turn to get the treatment that we're getting. And it wasn't like that. The women were really like all hanging around me and my friend. My friend has tattoos from head to toe. So he was also a really interesting looking guy for them. And they kept touching him and like lifting up his shirt and stuff. And we were just having a good time. And we went there 2 days in a row. And then one of the women was like, oh, do you guys live here? And my friend was like, no, we're just tourists. And he goes, but you should come out with us and we should go eat at a different restaurant here in China and like hang out and you can see more photos. I'll bring more photos and stuff like that. And the girls were like, leave this place and go with you? And my friend was like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, we can just figure it out. Do you have a night off tomorrow? And they were like, hold on. And the manager came over and I was like, I think we're going to get in trouble / kicked out. The manager was like, you want to take the girls out of the restaurant? And we're like, not right now, but maybe tomorrow or the next day. And he was like, I'll think about it and I'll talk to you after the meal. And I remember thinking like, I want to be really clear that we are not purchasing these women.
Yeah,
I don't understand what's going on. And then as we left, the girls were like pushing each other out the door jokingly and like laughing and saying stuff in Korean to my friend, especially, who was like really flirting with them. And the boss guy came down and he's like, sorry, it's not possible. And we were like, yeah, we understand. Okay, bye. And I remember the girls were disappointed when he told them, because I think that was news to them too. I think they thought like, oh, we're going to get like our time's going to get purchased and we're going to go out on a date. And then after we got back to the hotel, my friend was like, that would have been so fun. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that was on the table and we just didn't say the right things. Like, we didn't flash cash to like rent these women, but I don't want to do that. And he's like, yeah, me neither. That's really weird. But it seemed like they weren't allowed to leave. They also, oh, by the way, they told us they lived upstairs, which I thought was extra creepy. They told us they lived upstairs in the restaurant. Right? Like, and one of the women had said something, and again, could be lost in the translation, but she had said something like, I've never been out of this building since I've been to China. And I was like, no, like outside in the restaurant. And she's like, no, I've never been anywhere but here. And I was like,
yeah, bit of a red
am
flag.
I understanding her? And I think that I did. I think she'd never left the building.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was Dandong like a happening place? Is it like a...
No.
There's much going on?
Dandong, China is just, if the river's frozen, you can walk to North Korea. Now there's a fence. But before there wasn't a fence. And you could just walk there, and a bunch of this place was so bizarre, man. I got to tell you, like, we would go to, there's all these coffee shops that have Wi-Fi, right? I mean, now every place has Wi-Fi, but back then I was like, I need Wi-Fi to do stuff. So I'd go to the coffee shop that had Wi-Fi, and I remember sitting in a place and they had like a blonde white girl working the register, and I thought, oh, that's cool. She works abroad. And then my friend's like, what is this music? And I was like, oh yeah, it's all like, Jesus is the savior, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, every song is like super Jesus-y, huh?
Creed
so
life.
I went up to the girl and I go, hey, what's up with the religious music? Is this like a religious establishment? She's like, no, we're all Mormon. And I am like, who's all? And she's like, everyone that works here and a bunch of these cafes were all Mormon. And I was like, so are you on mission? She's like, nope, we live here. And I was like, what on earth is going on? And then I noticed that there were a ton of people in the back of this place, and they weren't all white, but they were mostly Asian. And I don't know if they were doing Bible study or what, but people would also come in and they would go back there and they'd be like, oh, hi, Angela, or whatever. And they would walk in the back. And I just thought, like, okay, something else is going on here because this building is huge. They obviously have the whole building, but only the front is this coffee shop and literally the front. So I told my buddy, I was like, something is going on here. He's like, I know, I just can't figure out what it is. So we went back the next day and we started asking her, like, so what's up? You guys have the whole building? And like, and she would not answer a single freaking question. Years later, I get back home and I'm talking about North Korean refugee smuggling with some people from this NGO, and they told me that almost certainly, because I don't remember the name of the coffee shop, they told me almost certainly what's going on there is these Mormons are smuggling refugees from North Korea, and North Koreans have instructions to like look for a certain sign and like walk in and there's a white person there. Because this place was open late AF too, by the way. It was open till like 1 o'clock in the morning, which is weird for a Mormon coffee shop. And don't Mormons also not drink coffee? So I was just like, what is going on? So I think what they did was they had these coffee shops right on, they were, by the way, they were all right on the river. They were on the street next to the river. I think they have these people cross the river, run to that place, say a code word or whatever it is, run to the back and get hidden from any authorities that might be pursuing them. And then they get smuggled down to China. Yeah, so through China, to South Korea. Because this woman was not, she had no time for our bullshit. Like, she was just like, hey, take your coffee, sit over there, shut up, don't answer, don't ask me any more questions, basically. And all of it was off. Every single bit of it was off. And it was only when I finally started talking to people who smuggle refugees through China and into South Korea that she was like, there's safe houses everywhere, and a lot of them are run by Mormons. Mormons and other religious people who essentially have a calling to risk a lot. Because if you get arrested doing this in China, I can't imagine they're like, it's fine. Here's your fine, or here's your flight home. I think they probably put you in prison even if you're a cute blonde 18-year-old
I don't
girl.
think you're going to be like cleaning up graffiti on the side of a building for that. No. I think you're going to be in a bit of trouble.
No. So me and my friend were creeped out by Dandong, man. We were uber creeped out. And we'd already been to North Korea a couple times. That was the time, and I'll shut up now at some point here and let you talk during your interview, but that was the time I also went on a boat tour of North Korea from Dandong. And I didn't speak Chinese at the time, but you're driving around in this boat, and it was summer, so the river wasn't frozen. But we were driving around on this boat, and you could see the North Korean guards on the shore. And I remember that one person was like, the captain of the boat was kind of alarmed, and people were taking photos. And I said, what's going on? And one of the Chinese guys was like, oh, usually the guards are in the tower or they don't come out, but now they came out to look at the boat. So this guy was snapping photos with like a telescopic lens. And then you hear the boat captain go, something, and then I was like, what's that? And he's like, oh, they don't want us to take photos. But the guy was like, screw it. Everybody was just like, screw it, I'm going to take photos anyway. The guard on the shore raises his rifle and aims it directly at the boat and is angry. Like, he's like, rah! And then the captain over the loudspeaker is screaming in Chinese and turns the boat around, and that was the end of the tour.
Well, it's more exciting than most boat tours I've ever taken. So it is.
Cool. However, when I got back, I read that a few months or years prior, some Chinese fishermen had been fishing in the river. Their engine died, and they drifted to the North Korean side. And when they got out, they were just summarily executed by the border guards. They just got shot. It wasn't like, let's push your boat out.
Tanked.
Let's call the other guy. No, they just shot him like on the beach. And we're like, hey, come pick up the bodies of these guys who tried to get into North Korea.
Wow.
Yeah.
They don't do those fishermen on Discovery Channel shows, do they?
No. Second deadliest catch is now the one with crabs. The deadliest one is the one where you get executed by North Korean border guards for setting foot on the beach because your boat is disabled. Insane. Yeah, so Dandong, no, it's not happening. It's just a bed of spies, espionage, and human trafficking, basically.
Yeah, I once met a guy in Yangon who was, I think he was a Chinese national, but he was like he got more and more drunk and told me that he was a gun runner, and he was working in Dandong. So he must have been working on this like illicit arms trade that goes through there as well, which is another way that the Koreans make a lot of money.
Tell me more about that, because I know I've heard things like the North Koreans get caught smuggling heroin to Australia in boats.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you're thinking of the Pongsu thing in 2003, right? They found that freighter off the coast of Australia, and I think it was flagged in Tuvalu, which is, I don't think Tuvalu has a particularly huge fleet, so that's probably a big, blue flag.
Well, it's like
and
Liberia also, right? Panama, Liberia, those flags of convenience. I've done a whole show. I've done a few shows on flags of convenience. And for those who are interested, the summary, go listen to those episodes. But the summary is, you basically, when you have a ship and it's American, you go, oh, I'm subject to American law. And then you go, nah, and you buy a flag of convenience from Liberia, and suddenly you're under you have to follow Liberian law, which says, do whatever you want, bro. Just whatever. Give us our $10,000 a year, and you can have slaves on your ship, and we'll never inspect it, basically.
Yeah. Feels like a loophole they should have sort of closed quite a while ago.
But there's no incentives to close it, right?
No,
I remember
exactly.
learning this on the show. It's like, who's going to close it? The people who make millions of dollars a year for their countries? No. The boat owners who are like, I can be subject to the laws of Denmark, where I have to pay fair wages and repair the ship, or the laws of Liberia, where I can keep human captives on here and force them to fish for me for years and then kill them. Like, all right, I'll choose the one that allows me to make money and has no ethics. And so there's no incentive to change that, because even if every government in the world was like, or every government in the free world was like, you can't do that. Well, the boat's in international waters. What are you going to do about that? You're going to change that law too?
Yeah. Multilateralism is not going so well at the moment anyway,
no.
there's probably no chance of that happening. I think that 2003 incident, I think it was the Pongsu, they found it's like over 125 kilos of heroin stashed in the hole. This was at a time, I think it was moored off the Victoria Coast, so like Melbourne basically is one of the richest drug markets in the world. So that was all going there. But even in this, 22 years since that happened, the whole drug industry has changed for North Korea. So they've got more into meth. I mean, who isn't into meth these days? It's the drug of choice.
I don't know. Like he who's not into meth cast the first stone.
Exactly. Wait, no, can I chuck a stone?
I don't know. So tell us about the North Korean meth problem. Then we'll wrap up the slave labor and human trafficking stuff and go into Bureau 39.
Yeah, it's it really changed again. Like I said before, it's the 90s that changed everything, right? So the 2003 Pongsu, that's at like the tail end of North Korea being deep into heroin, because it's poppy fields. It was growing its own, basically. It was homegrown heroin, and it was selling it on the international market until the mid to late 90s. The famine hits, all of these poppy fields freeze over, and they kind of lose the entire industry from that point, and they never get it back. So they do what is happening in the Golden Triangle, as I'm sure you know well, in the mid-90s, is they just switch to yaba, meth, crazy pills. It's all the rage all over the Golden Triangle, especially in Burma, Myanmar, where it's getting made by the Wa, this crazy kind of ethnic Chinese tribe on the border with China.
Yeah, I did a show about the Wa with Patrick.
They are an interesting bunch. I've met a few of those guys, and they're really nice actually, because they don't give a crap. they're completely kind of they're just sort of, no one cares what they do in Myanmar, so they're not under no threat whatsoever. So they just like chat to you openly.
Episode 966, Patrick Wynn, Wa State. It's basically when a drug cartel becomes a country.
Yeah,
it's like, hey,
he knows better than anyone. He's such a great writer.
He went there, wrote a book about it. He's basically just homeboys with a bunch of Wa people who are famous for putting heads on spikes from outsiders, which is kind of
they are.
I didn't think happened anymore.
But in my sample size of about 5 guys, they're lovely.
I think it's, if you're welcome, you're fine. If you show up unannounced, you're getting your head put on a spike.
Yeah. But my head is still firmly attached, so I'm all right. But it's so in the mid-90s, middle to late 90s, North Korea kind of goes with the flow, and it starts making meth. Obviously, it's way cheaper to produce. You can make it in factories if you've got the know-how, and if you've got the backing of an entire state that's willing to chuck a few mil at the industry, then you can do it overnight almost. So meth starts becoming the drug of choice in North Korea, and they start becoming a major sort of shipper of the drug around the region, especially kind of over to Australasia and Southeast Asia. They become sort of a big player in it. And so you get to the point now where meth has taken over in the North Korean state to such an extent that they've got a huge domestic consumption issue. There's a bunch of stories came out late last year about it being more, easier to get a wrap of meth than it is to get, cigarettes or a loaf of bread or something like that, which is pretty grim. And it's openly, from what I've read and what I know about this, like it's state driven. There is a state driven meth industry for domestic consumption as well as selling it overseas. It's kind of sort of doubly disgusting to kind of poison your own people as well as incarcerate and send them out the labor market. All of this horrible stuff. It's kind of, you would think with North Korea, surely it's going to all implode at some point soon, but it hasn't so far. I mean, it looks like it's getting even more bellicose between them and the South. So maybe they,
I remember one time when I was there, we asked our guide about marijuana because we saw some growing just randomly. And he's like, oh, it grows everywhere. And I said, do people smoke it? And he's like, some people do, but I don't know anyone that does. But it was kind of like, I don't know anyone that does. It's one of those. But he told us a lot of people will chew it or something like that. And it sounded like he didn't really know. I don't even know if you can do that, but maybe you can. We asked him about meth, and he said that it wasn't a problem, but kids did it sometimes. And I was like, that sure sounds like a problem. But, it was kind of like if you ask an adult who doesn't really know a lot or is trying to conceal how bad things are, if kids do marijuana, like, oh, only those hippie kids do that. And it's like, okay, but we're talking about meth. So the fact that you know any kids that do it is a little bit alarming. Slightly alarming.
They also big into moonshine as well, because I think alcohol is just far too expensive, and they make kind of vodka basically out of like spuds and other stuff. And we were talking about the stuff that the diplomats do, and I think one of the things I saw was that they, in like Pakistan and Kuwait and some other dry countries, North Korean diplomats have been sort of selling whiskey and beer and other black market alcohol to the locals. So they're like, even if it's making them sort of $10, they're doing it. It's like any little helps the Kims. So it's a crazy place.
That to me is wild. I mean, just the fact that diplomats are sort of self-funded in North Korea or by North Korea. Like if you're a diplomat, you live in, I don't know, you're a North Korean diplomat, you live in Australia. They're not like, here's all the money you need to run your embassy. It's like, you got to figure out, maybe for Australia it's different, but for many countries, they just have to figure out how to survive there. If you're the North Korean ambassador to Sierra Leone, you're essentially in charge of running organized crime rackets so that you can run the embassy and then send proceeds back to the Kim family. And if you can't do that, I assume they recall you and put somebody else in place who's just maybe more enterprising, because the idea is you're generating revenue. They don't really probably care that much. I mean, diplomatic relations for the Kim family is, what are you bringing to the table? How much money are you generating for North Korea? It doesn't matter if it's legal or not. And so the legal stuff would be like, hey, we're going to have guest workers come over here and build an airport and clear a jungle and do that. That's going to be brutal. And the illegal stuff is, and also we're going to sell people or run guns from here through there, or run drugs through the country to another country.
Yeah.
So
imagine
crazy.
There's some Australian guy in Melbourne needs a new fix, and he gets a text from his dealer. It's like, meet me here, and he goes to the house, and it's just got a North Korean flag flying out the top of it.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, this is weird, but whatever.
But you know what though? Like, I get it, because sure, state security is monitoring all embassies, but they're maybe not able to figure out exactly what's going on inside, because it's not like they can get a warrant to go in there. So yes, state security might be monitoring them, but if they start arresting random small-time drug dealers that pop out, they're going to figure out that they're under surveillance and maybe do something about it. So essentially, if you go in there and you buy a kilo of cocaine or heroin, the government has to decide whether or not they really care about that enough to potentially disclose sources and methods in how they catch you. And if it's a place with rule of law, they have to say, we have a wiretap on the North Korean embassy, and here's them talking with you about this. And they're not going to do that, right? No. They're not going to do that because they want real intelligence. So what they're going to try to do is catch you randomly coming out with it. But that's going to eventually add up and be too much for a coincidence. And if you're not selling the drugs in that country, right, if you're going through Sierra Leone, but you're only selling your drugs in Ivory Coast or something, like, are they going to do anything about it? Or are they going to be like, look, the guy doesn't sell the stuff here, screw it.
Yeah.
Right? He's bringing money back. He's greasing the palms of certain people high up in the government, whatever. What do we care?
And that's why you keep that backpacker motel open in Berlin, right? Because you want the dirt. And if letting them have some crappy hostel keeps them in the tent, then I guess you're gonna just keep them in the city no matter what to find out what the hell they're doing.
I think that's probably true. And also, like, they're making a bunch of money from a backpacker hostel, and they said, hey, if we ever close this place down, let's just sell guns and drugs to neo-Nazi gangs. Right, let's keep the hostel open, right? Like, let's keep that open. And if they start selling guns and drugs to the neo-Nazi gang, we'll crack down on all of their operations. But until then, I feel like having cheap bunk beds and some cheap beer is probably relatively harmless. I'm just trying to get in the head. A friend of mine, Charles Rue, again, also an episode of the show, he mentioned that he was repatriated from China because his dad was Chinese, also a drug dealer. He got repatriated to North Korea after escaping, and they put him in a labor camp domestically because we were talking about working outside of North Korea and that generating revenue, but there's people inside North Korea, tremendous numbers of them working in, he was a kid. He was like 12 at the time or something, or 15, I can't remember. And he worked in the mines, like he worked in coal mines, basically. And he actually said it wasn't that bad, and he stayed after his punishment to continue working there, and he spent his money on alcohol and saved a little bit and then escaped to China again.
Jeez, what a life.
I know.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a really interesting dude. I'm going to have him back on the show now that his English is better. But I wanted to highlight that because a lot of people think like, oh, why escape from something and then go work in this other place? Or why volunteer to work abroad like this? And the truth is it's actually better to be in a North Korean mine than it is to be maybe unemployed in North Korea because he was homeless before that. And it's better to be working abroad welding with no glasses and no protective clothing than it is to be working in North Korea where maybe you just don't even have food.
Yeah, I mean, this is a cold place, right? I was in Incheon doing an interview in January and just south of the North Korean border. It's like minus 12 degrees C. It's like crazy. It's crazy cold. You're going to die if you're not inside. So maybe just being inside is the reason that you work. It's grim stuff.
The slavery element or the forced labor element inside North Korea is so widespread. I read in a piece that I think you wrote, some farms and factories don't pay wages or provide food to their workers. And it says, during implementation of short-term economic plans, factories and farms increase workers' hours and ask workers for contributions of grain and money to purchase supplies for renovations and repairs. So basically, you have to work there and you don't get paid. I mean, that's slavery, basically.
Yeah, straight up and down. Yeah. If you don't work for us, you die. We're not going to pay you. We're not going to give you anything. You might live. You'll probably die anyway. But it's better to go with us. What a great offer. Yeah,
not that compelling when you phrase it like that, but sure. We saw so many, on one of my trips to North Korea, we saw so many people working in the fields, and our guide told us that every year they have to stop going to school for a couple of months and they go and help the farmers harvest food, which is nuts.
Yeah.
And it's like you're working for free for a couple of months in the fields because it's just so labor intensive and they don't have machinery to do it.
Oh, man. And increasingly, right, all of this money is just going into making bombs that Kim can threaten everyone with. So that he just, stays going for another, few months or a year or until whenever his heart gives out. But it's not changing.
These guys are bastards, but I wouldn't trade my life for theirs. I'll tell you that. There's no way they're not under constant chronic stress.
Yeah, no. I mean, you can see it on the guy. He doesn't look well.
No, no. He looks like a guy who's got some things on his mind. He was 27 a few years ago, and now he's 67 by the look of it. I mean, he is just aging terribly.
Yeah, it doesn't say much for the Swiss education system, but
no. He, ironically, my friend, my guide in North Korea, my friend, she said that she loved working in the fields because you get to meet new people, and you almost never actually get to do that in North Korea because you go to school with the same people, then you go to college. But if you go to the college that she went to, which is like a foreign language university, it's basically the same privileged cadre of people that you've known your whole life from other schools in Pyongyang. There's maybe a few new people, but that's kind of it. And then, so when you go work in the fields, they just put you they assign you geographically, I guess. So she's like, you just meet all these new people. And she's like, so many girls that she knows met their boyfriends while working in the fields, because otherwise you're just with the same people you grew up with. And you know how it is when you're dating. You're tired of those people, right? You see those people grow up there. It's like, then you meet some new guy and he's like working with his shirt off outside. And you're just like, woo, it's hot out here, right? I mean, it's she loved it. She said everybody loved it, and they would play music at night and stuff. It sounds kind of fun until you realize that you're actually a slave for the Kim family working on a farm.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, sometimes my WhatsApp groups and my friends from home get a little bit memey and boring. But I guess if we all had to work in the fields for no money and we were dying, then it would be a little bit worse. So I don't have a lot to complain about.
It would be slightly worse. So to put a bow on this forced labor thing, they work 12 to 16 hours a day, sometimes 20 hours a day. They're allowed 2 days off per month, and they work in a wide range of industries and hazardous conditions: apparel, construction, footwear manufacturing, hospitality, information technology services, logging. I don't know, the IT services thing. I want to put an asterisk by that and find out more, because that doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, they're not working for Airbnb. I think they might be doing something less lucrative.
Yeah, well, like, what IT services are you providing when you're a forced laborer? That screams dodgy to me. Logging, medical, pharmaceuticals. Also, I don't know. I assume they're packaging medications, maybe.
PPE,
Restaurants.
I think they did loads of that during COVID as well.
That makes sense. Seafood processing, textiles, and shipbuilding. And the shipbuilding stuff, I think, was the stuff we were talking about in Poland. NGOs report that the government manages these workers as a matter of state policy. This is from an NGO report. And they're under close, constant surveillance by government security agents. They live in shared dormitories, poor living conditions, obviously no freedom of movement, freedom of communication. Their passports are confiscated. And if they complain or attempt to complain to outside parties or escape, their families are punished inside North Korea. So and their salaries, of course, are appropriated and deposited into accounts controlled by the government of North Korea. And they're basically left, like, if they're a shipbuilder, the average pay, I think, was 90 euros per month. Right? They cover your food and your living conditions, which are terrible, but they take all of your money except for 90 euros per month, which is actually a lot. That's why people take these jobs if they're allowed to choose, because it's actually paid way better than working inside North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, the real bastards in this story are the Poles, right, who are doing it, because those are the kind of countries that you can sort of control. You would think of being in the Western sphere or whatever you want to think of it. And they're taking slave laborers for $90 a month. It's just, that's the terrible part. You can't really change a lot what happens in North Korea, but you can change that.
Right. You can change the demand for this kind of thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
It's estimated that the regime earns up to $1 billion a year from this, because they're all over Africa, Middle East, things like that, and apparently Europe. And women are trafficked as well. I'll let you imagine what happens there. They're sold as wives many times. And that's horrific. And a lot of this is illegal in China, right? So the kids they have, what happens to the kids? Do you have any idea? Because if you have kids with your illegal North Korean wife who doesn't exist on paper, is your kid Chinese, or are they stateless?
Yeah, I would assume they're Chinese, but I don't know. Where's the money coming from? Where's it going there? It's just I would assume that the Chinese have genuinely tried to crack down on that a bit, because I think they have, with the drugs as well, a big part of they did a big anti-drug drive in like 2014-15, which is part of the fentanyl problem now, but they drove a lot of meth production out of China, and I think they stamped out a lot of North Korean stuff. But arranged marriages and sex work, it's just so, it's just like a dark economy upon a dark economy. So where the hell is that money going? I have no idea.
So tell us about Bureau 39. We've touched on some of these money-making activities, but Bureau 39 is kind of the organization in charge of this whole thing. So this is not just like accidentally these people are earning money for the regime. This is a very conscious process. It is one of the top priorities, if not the top priority, of the Kim family.
Yeah, this is kind of like if it's a mafia, then this is the guys hanging out at the strip club in The Sopranos. Like these are the guys sort of devising all the scams and schemes. They're going to get all this money. It goes back a long way. Like it goes back to the 70s again with Kim Il Sung. It's not new. It was like, I think it's called Bureau 39 because it's on in the 9th room of the 3rd floor of the finance department in Pyongyang, and it's supposed to maintain sort of the various informal networks of money that keep the despots afloat. like one of the most famous or infamous ones of this is this thing called the Kipkunjor, which is like the pleasure squad, which back in the day, Kim Il-sung had some pretty weird views about sex and women that veered into, I don't know. I'm gonna say problematic. That's the phrase that everyone uses now, right?
Okay.
But he had like, basically, sex was the fountain of youth. So he just had this like conveyor belt of young women coming through Bureau 39 that were basically was a state brothel. But then it branched into other stuff like we've been talking about, dealing in weapons, dealing in drugs. One of the things is counterfeiting, which was a huge, huge deal back in the 90s. Still going forward now, these things called super dollars, which are counterfeit, usually $100 bills that are so good that they've actually caused a genuine dent in the value of the US currency at various points in history. I think there was one story where there was so much of it floating around parts of Africa at the time that US officials even thought about, stopping runs on $100 bills at the mint.
Jeez.
So these things are pretty hardcore. There's all other kinds of illicit trades that Bureau 39 does. It deals in, ivory, wildlife trafficking, DVDs, Blu-rays, whatever you can think of as pirated, toys, kids' toys, just crappy electronic devices, gold, cars, guns, grenades, whatever you can think of. It's kind of like the nerve center of everything illegal that happens in the North Korean state. And then part of that, of course, is the cybercrime, right, which has become a huge earner. I mean, if not the biggest earner, bigger than the billion that they're getting from these sort of poor people working in fields in the middle of nowhere.
All right, a quick break. I'm going to tell you about something that'll actually make your life a little bit easier. I regularly take shots of Ketone IQ plus caffeine from HVMN. It is 5 grams of ketones, 100 milligrams of caffeine from green tea. So no sugar, no crash, just clean, focused energy. Now, ketones are molecules that your body naturally produces during fasting, intense exercise, or a low-carb, high-fat diet, so aka ketosis. And when glucose, carbs, aren't readily available, your liver breaks down fat into ketones, which then become an alternative fuel source for your brain and muscles. And our body likes using ketones because they're a high-efficiency fuel, especially for the brain and the muscles. Ketone IQ from HVMN skips that whole process, gives you pure, drinkable ketones, so you get the benefits of ketone energy without having to fast for days on end or go full keto. I take it before I hit the gym. It gives me that steady, locked-in energy without making me feel like I'm kind of vibrating a little bit. And I also take it before I need to do a show. Same deal. I feel focused, same steady energy. And it's not just me. Team Visma, Lisa Bike, literally the best pro cycling team in the world. They use Ketone IQ to fuel their races. These guys won the Tour de France twice, dominated all 3 Grand Tours last year. Olympians, Ironman champions, they're all on this stuff because it works. So if you want to try it, go to ketone.com/Jordan. You'll get 30% off your first subscription order and a free 6-pack of Ketone IQ. That's these little things right here. Get energy that actually works. Ketone.com/Jordan. Links in the description. If you're thinking about starting a business or you already have one and maybe logo or branding design is not your strong suit, you're going to love Design.com. With Design.com, creating a standout logo is as easy as it gets. You just pop in your business name and your industry, and in seconds, you're going to get thousands of custom logos to choose from. Every design is handcrafted by top designers and exclusive to Design.com, so you're getting something unique. Once you find a design that you like, you can customize the fonts, the colors, the layouts to make it yours. Then you download all those assets and you're good to go. And Design.com doesn't just stop at logos. They've got tools to help you create all of your branding materials, from website to social media posts to business cards, all perfectly aligned with your brand. If you already have a logo, you can upload it and you get instant access to thousands of design templates that actually match your brand's look and your color scheme. So this tool saves you a lot of time. It lets you focus on growing your business instead of getting stuck in the weeds with marketing materials. With a 4.8-star Trustpilot rating, Design.com is legit amazing. It's run by a friend of mine. The company's been around for a while. They really do care about their customers. Try it for free at design.com/Jordan. That's design.com/Jordan.
Yeah, let's talk about that in a second. By the way, if you're interested in more on the arms trade with North Korea, episode 527, we had this guy, my friend, Ulrich Larson. They made a movie called The Mole. You've heard of this, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this guy, he is a retired chef. Ulrich, and he basically got really bored and infiltrated the North Korean Friendship Association, which is basically like unemployed losers and old people who are really lonely all across the world who have these meetings to talk about how great North Korea is. But it's like the height of pathetic. Anyway, he stays in there for like a decade or some crazy amount of time going to these meetings, and it comes up with an idea to earn money for the regime, and that it gets run up the flagpole, and they end up meeting these arms traffickers in Beijing. And it's an
crazy,
absolutely
man.
batshit crazy story with Ulrich and another guest on the show, Mr. James, he plays Mr. James in the movie. And it's fascinating. It's one of the coolest documentaries I've ever seen. It's basically a civilian-run sting operation that showed that North Korea was willing to sell arms to anyone, especially if they were going to get to, whatever, Syria or Africa. They just don't care. They don't care at all. So okay, Bureau 39, they get the money back to DPRK, to North Korea, through diplomatic channels. Are they literally carrying duffel bags full of money through the airport and just having them not be inspected because they're diplomats? Is that how this works?
Yep, that's exactly what's
Wow.
going on. Yep, just big old bags of stuff in the diplomatic bags, and cases going through the airports. You can't search them. That's how a lot of this stuff is being done. It's kind of genius, right? In a way, just to use your entire diplomatic corps as a mafia. Who are working under threat of death and the deaths of their entire families. So it's a pretty well-oiled system. But yeah, like it's just about any illicit market that you can imagine in the world. North Korea is skimming some of it somewhere, whether it's like old books or headphones or whatever. They're flogging stuff on the black market. But the stuff that they've become sort of world leaders in is the cybercrime.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, there's a group called the Lazarus Group. I think some of your listeners probably will have heard of it before.
Sure.
And it's responsible for a huge number. It basically started out as a sort of asymmetrical warfare group, which it still is to some extent. And I think it started in 2009, carried out a bunch of attacks. People might remember the WannaCry ransomware attack in 2017, ran into billions of dollars of damage that it did. Like, great at creating chaos, right? All of these hackers working out of Pyongyang, most of them trained in China. I think there were some centers in China. I remember putting together a piece for The Economist back in like 2012, and me and my co-writer figured out that some of these hackers have been using keyboards that would have initially have been sort of wired into the Korean alphabet, which is why, like a lot of people were figuring out that these groups were carrying out attacks. But then as the years go by, they realize they can also not just do attacks, but they can actually pawn a lot of people's money. So they start doing smaller attacks. They start, like malware, ransomware, people who remember the internet when it was really good, when there were more than sort of 4 websites. There were a bunch of, like getting a virus from some GeoCities website was an actual thing. And some of that was run by the North Korean regime. But then, like, in the last, 10 years or so, they've really ramped up these schemes to be serious financial crimes. So you get your Bangladesh bank heist in 2016. It's one of the biggest cybercrimes in history. They managed to basically convince people to trade a bunch of money, but it's being stolen by North Korea on the way. They make off with $80 to $85 million. I think they make out with in total. They would have got
the
like
Bangladesh
900
heist?
million. What's that?
Yeah, tell us about the Bangladesh bank heist. I remember learning about this, but I don't understand how it worked.
It's basically that they managed to imitate the trading systems of the bank. And the clue as to where the weaknesses were in the system are in the title of the heist. So Bangladesh wasn't using the most up-to-date security to run some of its systems. So basically what they did was they tried to ape the bank trying to trade a bunch of money. And they would have actually gotten away with nearly $1 billion if it weren't for those pesky guys at the New York Federal Reserve. Because what they did was the hackers, in trying to mimic a transfer, they actually misspelled one of the words, and that's what gave them away. So, like, as the money was pouring out, they were able to actually just like shut the valve down, because they're like, okay, I don't think that's actually spelt like that. So it's like proper Nigerian print scam style stuff.
Yeah.
But it was
guy got
incredibly
fired.
successful.
Out of a cannon. There's so you mean to tell me we lost $900 million because you don't know how to spell Bangladesh? I was typing really fast. Where's the anti-aircraft gun and the dogs?
Exactly. Yeah, you wouldn't want to be that guy. That's a bad Monday.
No, that's a bad Monday. Wow. But here's my question. I don't know a lot about the inner workings of this type of thing, but isn't this all digital when you're talking about bank wires for this amount of money? So can't you go, oh yeah, we wired a bunch of money to North Korea? No. We're undoing that. That's ridiculous. Any money from North Korea is not valid. This came from Bangladesh. Like, this is ridiculous. You're not getting it. It's not like they had a truck full of money going across the border. No. So I don't get why you can't undo something like that. It's not cryptocurrency. It's not on the blockchain.
Yeah, you've gone above my head there as well.
I see.
To be honest, I don't really know how the international finance system works. If I did, I probably wouldn't be a journalist. I'd make a lot more money. But I'm really not sure. I think the key was that they mimicked the bank, and that the bank had sent some of the money before they realized they made a terrible error. But I think once you reroute some of that money, it is gone, and it goes into sort of dark bank accounts, probably in Switzerland. I mean, everyone loves a Swiss bank account. And then it's disappeared. That's it. That money's off the books. I mean, that's part of the reason that there is such a problem with dark money in the world. I think they're like $1 in $8 that's traded in the entire planet is illicit. Is part of the dark economy, shadow economy. So yeah, once it's gone, it's gone.
I know that North Korea has something like 1,600 hackers, which might not sound like a lot, but is a lot since they're all working with each other. I mean, this is the amount of. This is not like the United States has 10,000 hackers, but it's kids in their mom's basement who are like, dude, I totally took down Pornhub for like 5 minutes, right? It's not that kind of hacker. These are people who sit in office buildings and run heists for the regime. And tell me, wasn't there a crypto heist recently where they stole like $1 billion or more than $1 billion? It was like a crazy huge crypto heist recently.
Yeah, there was was that like I think it was like 2021, maybe 20. Yeah. So the good thing about crypto is the blockchain, but the bad thing about crypto is the blockchain, right? So it's once the money's there, it's like. Oh no, this is the more recent one.
This is like March 2025. Yeah.
North
Korean hackers cash out hundreds of millions, stole 1.5 billion from something called Bybit, which I've never heard of because I don't keep my money in exchanges, which is because they get hacked by North Korea. Yeah. Wow. Record-breaking $1.5 billion crypto heist, unrecoverable funds. They've converted at least $300 million of that into cash. Yep, the criminals known as the Lazarus Group swiped the huge haul of digital tokens in a hack on crypto exchange Bybit in March. Since then, in February, it's been a cat and mouse game to track and block hackers from moving the crypto into usable cash, which is a losing proposition, of course. The hacking team is working nearly 24 hours a day, funneling the money into the regime's military development, most likely. Interesting. They're trying, every minute matters for the hackers who are trying to confuse the money trail, and they are extremely sophisticated in what they are doing. This is on the BBC, so we can link to this article as needed.
That's a hell of a lot of money. And it just shows you that I think when we talk about these groups, like you say, like people think we think of it in the West as sort of individuals and hacking groups and kind of bands of disparate, sort of like kind of punky outfits trying to rip off people. But out there, and it's the same when you talk to people about Russian and Chinese misinformation groups, right? It's not, these aren't just a couple of dozen people sitting in an office like typing out tweets, although that is sometimes what they do. But this is extremely professionalized people working, in North Korea's case, probably 20 hours a day, just trying to pull off that one heist.
Smoking that domestic meth.
Double shift, guys.
Double shift. Yeah, it says they're working 20 hours a day, and I'm like, how do you stay up for? Oh no, never mind. I got it.
We got that.
20% of the money has gone dark, and I see. Oh, it's interesting. Multiple people are sharing rewards for identifying the money. So essentially they've sort of crowdsourced tracking a lot of this as well, which is that's so blockchain, isn't it? Being like, hey, everybody, track this money. And it looks like they're funneling it through like really shady exchanges little bit at a time. This is so interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
This is fascinating. Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, and here's a wanted by the FBI. They identified someone in the Lazarus group. This guy looks so North Korean. He's just dressed like as a North Korean guy.
Like a
This
suede
is right on the nose, man.
suit.
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck catching him. I don't think you're going to have much. I don't think he's going to be walking around sort of like Florida or California anytime soon. But I don't know. Maybe he wants to go on holiday in the States. Yeah, I mean, then when you look at the back catalog of these guys, I mean,
the hacks, you mean?
Like 50
what they've done?
mil, 275 mil, 600
Yeah.
mil. You could see why this is almost, the ROI on this is unbelievable, right? I mean, in the case of the drugs or the labor, you've got to put in a hell of a lot of effort sending thousands and thousands of people into the world trying to get some money back. And like I just said, like, some of them are just selling bottles of whiskey to Pakistani diplomats. Whereas this is you making billions overnight potentially. So no wonder they're pouring all their funds into this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The problem here is hacking is kind of a fungible skill set, right? If you're really that good that you can change a digital wallet address inside a company that really cares a lot about security, like Bybit or any crypto exchange, you can certainly take down the power system in Boston, which hasn't updated its crap since 1991. Right, and uses Windows 95 or something on most of its other systems, and doesn't have any sort of updated infrastructure. Security is an afterthought because it's expensive, et cetera. I mean, turning that's going to be taking candy from a baby if you can do something sophisticated like steal $600 million from a crypto exchange.
Yeah, and like on the attacking front as well, right? They downed parts of the NHS in the UK. It's one of the biggest systems in the whole world, and they were just running on like Windows XP. So North Koreans hacked them, sent a bunch of stuff down. People missed their surgeries. People died. It's crazy the kind of chaos that you can cause. I mean, it is actually like one of those crappy Hollywood movies they made in the 90s about Y2K. Like it's happening. It's just not quite as schlocky as that.
Yeah, it's really terrifying, and it also shows you, the only upside is the Kim family really the regime has no real incentive so far to do something truly horrible to the U.S. because what they don't want is for the U.S. to do something truly horrible back. Like, yeah, we're sanctioning them right now, all this, but what they're afraid of is a real effort to take down North Korea. Yes, they have nukes. They can hold us off for a while, but I'm going to go ahead and guess there's a lot more that we could do to the Kim family specifically. I mean, he's not looking well. He could suddenly, him and a lot of his family members could suddenly die tomorrow. And I know that the Chinese, this sounds way more heavy duty and cool than it is, but I'll say it anyway. I have an inside source who deals with negotiations between China and North Korea, stuff like that. China is so sick of dealing with the North Koreans shit that it's not even funny. They have them as a buffer state, so there's not a refugee crisis on the Chinese border from North Korea, but they are beyond sick. Instability is bad for business. And China is all about business. And so when North Korea is like, we're going to nuke you, China's like, shut up, man. We're trying to sell cheap shit to the whole planet. Can you not? Yeah. And Kim's like, but I need food and money. And China's like, God damn, shut up already. We'll figure this out. You don't need to spout off and piss off everybody who's got missiles, right? So they're super sick of these guys. And shutting down, doing something truly horrible, China's kind of like, you're putting us between a rock and a hard place, right? And so they're sick of this crap too. So that's the upside. The downside is that it could all change in a second. If the Kim family feels truly threatened by something, they could do something truly horrible because they have nothing to lose. They certainly don't care if their country gets attacked. I mean, if they're already going down, screw it. Let everybody burn it all to the ground. That's where these guys are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, Korea got flattened once before because of that.
That's right.
So why not do it again? I mean, it's crazy. Like, you're talking about the embarrassment of the Chinese and what the North Koreans are doing now, sending these troops into Ukraine as well. That must be terrible for their relationship with China. The Chinese are doing stuff, that is somewhat sophisticated, sending material and weapons and things like this to the Russians in the war. And then the North Koreans are sending these basically, under-equipped slaves to fight on the front line who are getting captured and parading around in the media that's not good for the Chinese.
not good.
I mean, it's just terrible.
North Korea sends their special forces, shock troops, or whatever. I know there's Chinese troops getting caught in Ukraine, but and I'm saying this just based on what I know about China and no inside information. I'm no expert by any means, but I don't think that that's state sanctioned. I don't think that if you pick up a Chinese guy in Ukraine that it was sent by Xi Jinping secretly. I think it's a guy who went, man, my job really sucks over here in Hunan, rural Hunan province. I am going to walk into this recruiting office that my friend told me about, and I'm going to go to Ukraine, and I'm going to make $37,000, which is 5 times what I make here on this farm or whatever, and I'm going to come home and buy stuff for my family. And then they get sent to the front, and they get blown up or captured, and they're like, whoops, that didn't work out how I planned. I really don't think China is sending handfuls or whatever of Chinese.
China does not need to do this at the
No,
moment.
they don't need the money. It's a bad look for China all around. I just really don't see that being a state sanctioned thing. If China decides to help Russia and Ukraine, everyone is going to know because they're going to have massive shipments of tanks and armaments and 100,000 troops or something shoring up the back lines and the supply lines and logistics in Ukraine. It's not going to be 50 guys or 5 guys or whatever they've caught so far. It's just not going to be that. So one thing I wanted to ask about was the forced labor that we see in China from North Koreans. Are Chinese factories outsourcing this stuff to North Korea? Because if that's the case, you know how Nike will go to China, inspect the factories, and then tell us like, "Hey, these are all above board. It's fine. We inspected the factory." I'm wondering if China doesn't outsource some labor to North Korea, because it's kind of what I might consider doing if I was a shady Chinese factory owner.
Yeah, I think that has happened in the past. People have flagged it up that places like, Dandong being a good example where people are, being forced into work in factories. It's kind of part of that. It's part of the synergy between China and North Korea, right? When one needs money or the other needs labor, there's just kind of like it seems to be a rule between the two that you can kind of exchange the two pretty freely. And there's plenty of factories and manufacturing centers in China where a lot of North Korean labor has shown up. I think there's a place, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's a really famous city in southern China, which is like the world's largest, I think they call it the world's largest small economic goods marketplace, which is basically when you think about, when you go on like Temu or Alibaba and you look at like tripod for iPhone or, USB port for this, it's all that kind of tiny electronic stuff. It's coming out of this one city. I think it's called Yuwu. And there's a lot of North Korean labor, I think, in that city there, where they're building like pretty cheap, pretty unsophisticated electronic equipment that just gets flooded onto Western markets. And I have heard of people working in mines and other sort of really dirty industries as well. So yeah, it definitely does happen, and I think it's probably going to continue to happen because that's the stuff that no one really in the West can do anything about, nor truly gives much of a crap about changing, because that is seen as, China has become so powerful now, and there are all these flashpoints around the world where we're terrified of China kicking off in Taiwan or the Philippines or Europe or wherever, that we're not really going to bother the Chinese Communist Party if they are using forced labor from North Korea and propping up the regime there in their own borders. So it's just beyond anyone's purview.
It is, and also, okay, so let's say we laid down the law and sacrificed a bunch of goodwill to get them to not do that with North Koreans. They're just going to have Burmese people do it instead. I mean, or Cambodians, right? It's not sort of a unique thing. Forced labor exists where there's a market for it, and there's always going to be a market for it. In China,
it's the same thing in drugs, right? I mean, China went on this massive anti-drugs run because it realized all its people were getting addicted to meth, but all it did was push all of these ethnic Chinese gangs across the borders of its neighbors, and now you have gigantic gangs in Burma and Laos and wherever producing maybe more drugs for international markets, which are causing even more chaos. Even as far away as where I am in New Zealand, you got stuff coming from the Golden Triangle now, and meth addiction is a real huge issue. So, yeah, it's it's always the incentives below the incentives with China. I think there's kind of always a top line, a headline of what we think China is incentivized to do, but below it, usually the reverse is true. And I think something else that we're going to talk about with money laundering as well, that is definitely the case with drugs and money laundering.
I'm curious what you mean by that, but you're right. There's this strange tradition, if I can say that, among China, the nation of, and I'm not even blaming them for this. I think it was like essentially just a consequence of their history. But you see all these people come from China pre-Mao because they're poor, and they settle in San Francisco, and they settle in, I don't know, whatever, Australia and all these other places. And there's this massive diaspora. And then Mao comes, and all these people leave, and they go to Taiwan, and they go to America, and they go to Canada, and they go to, it increases the diaspora again 100-fold. And then now, oh man, this place is pretty rough. I want to get my capital out of here. So it increases the diaspora and the money from China in the West. And then they go, hey, we got to get all these drugs and crime out of here. So they push them into Southeast Asia and all over the rest of Asia. And so there's this massive Chinese diaspora that's fled or left or been exiled, and it's just like a consequence of all the crazy crap that keeps happening there, and people leave so they can do business elsewhere, whether it's legal or not. It's just kind of a fascinating way, because there are Chinese people literally everywhere, and it's in part because they fled for better, greener pastures, or they were going to get prosecuted at home, so now they're doing whatever they're doing overseas. And every wave of that has had massive amounts of organized crime, but it pales in comparison, I would imagine, to the amount of legitimately talented immigrants that end up leaving China and coming to places like the United States. I always try to clarify that, because I don't want people to think like, oh, he hates China and he hates Chinese people. My family's literally Chinese. So I'm not doing that. Like the biggest victim of anything that's ever happened in China, Mao, pre-Mao, post-Mao, it's always the Chinese people. They're the biggest victims of all this, as well as the people that end up taking the most flack. So I try to be as fair as I can about that. Let's talk about, on that note, let's talk about Chinese money laundering.
Here we go. What a segue.
Yeah. So tell me about this. This is called flying money, right? Fei Qian. Where did this come from?
It's, it like you say, Chinese people have been traveling the world for a hell of a long time. And this form of money laundering or mirror transactions, whatever you want to call it, I mean, people might know it better by its Arab version, which is Hawala, which is networks of, informal money networks. This has been going on for around about 1400 years. It starts out in the Tang Dynasty around the 7th century, we think. I don't know, it could be a bit earlier. But it's basically the invention of paper money. And some people consider flying money to be the first form of banknotes, essentially. So what would happen is Chinese merchants would, till the fields, do whatever they do, and make a bunch of money. It's all in coins. But you don't want to be carrying coins across a provincial border because there are bandits. And, I don't want to be carrying coins across a provincial border today. So what do? You kind of get a note from the local treasury in your region saying, okay, he's got the funds, like here's a note to prove it. You take that note, you travel across the country, you give it to the other treasury. Okay, that's a promise. It's early banking, basically. It's a promissory note. It's very similar to what we even do today, basically. And so the money hasn't physically changed locations, right? It's still in a lockbox in, Guy A's home back in Xi'an. But now he's picked up a bunch of money in Beijing. And a transaction has taken place, but the money hasn't physically moved. And that's the key thing to remember with flying money or Fei Qian. So it's even to this day, it's almost impossible to detect because the money hasn't changed location. So you can't just check a bank's details, or you can't just see money going over a border, where authorities would traditionally get a look in to see where money's going. So as Chinese merchants, they're not just traveling in China anymore, say 12th, 13th, 14th century, you get great Chinese travelers who have been lost to Western history because we tend to focus on, European settlers and colonialists. But that is when you get Chinatowns popping up all over the world. Incidentally, the first Chinatown in the world is in Manila in the Philippines.
I did not know that.
It's one of my favorite places on earth. It's so cool. But in these Chinatowns, obviously, then you'll get people wanting to remit money back home. And they're not going to use traditional systems where it's going to cost them a ton of money, you know, in commissions to financiers or bankers, whomever is existing at that time. So they're going to use flying money. So then this system goes global, right? This Fei Qian, and it works on this system of guanxi, which is an honor system. It's like a familial honor system. You know, it's almost like an omerta in the mafia. You know, you don't snitch, you don't speak out. No one tells you where the money is except for the guys who do it. So this all dies down when Mao takes over and the People's Republic of China comes into existence in 1949, because obviously they want the state to be all powerful. They don't like these informal money lending or money remittance networks, and so a lot of these informal Fei Qian networks that are profligating all around the world, they get shut down in favor of huge state institutions. But they carry on, obviously, because where there's money, there's going to be a way to move it. So they kind of bubble around in the early years of communist China. And then in 1978, when the economy opens up and Deng Xiaoping sends, you know, Chinese merchants again all over the world to try and get exchange for the benefit of China, then it kind of ramps up again. And so it's never gone away. It's always been incredibly popular. It's kind of the thing that everyone knows but doesn't really talk about. You know, even now, if you go on WeChat or any other Chinese social media network, you can type in flying money, or you can type in money bank or transfer. You'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of people popping up, like all of these identities willing to do flying money transactions. And it's just not worth the government's time and investiture to get involved in this, because everyone is using it, right? So it is the grease that sort of like it lets this informal money network prosper in China.
Huh. Interesting. You'd think that the state would have an interest in knowing where and who has money, especially a state like China, which is authoritarian. You know, even the United States wants to know, hey, where you got your money. You know, all right, we just want to know where it is. That's all. We just make sure you're paying taxes, that kind of thing, right? You know, they want you to declare your cryptocurrency. They want you to declare that you have money hidden under the mattress. They don't care that it's under the mattress. They just want to know that you have it. You'd think China would be like that. But I think and I'm sure they are, but I think part of the problem is, man, have you ever tried to transfer money from a Chinese bank to another bank? Have you ever tried to do this?
Thankfully, no.
I will tell you, I don't know how fast Fei Qian is. I'm going to guess it's basically instant.
Yeah.
You better bring a sack lunch if you go to a Chinese bank and you want to do a complicated transaction that's international, especially. And you also better hope that it's under $50,000 per year that you are transferring, because if you want to transfer $400,000 out of China, I mean, good luck. You can wait 8 years and do it the legal way, or you can probably do it not that way and do it in a day or less, because there's capital flight restrictions.
There's stories that I heard from people who had worked in, you know, Shanghai, Beijing, major international cities, and they're going into banks to try and send funds back to Europe or the US or wherever they're headquartered. And they've got people walking around the bank forecourt saying, would you like to save yourself an entire day and a lot of money by sending a flying money transaction with me? And even the banks sometimes don't sort of stand in the way of those guys, because it's so prevalent.
The best gig in China would be the person who handles these transfers and is like, we can do this one of two ways. You can do it through me, or you can do it through my brother, who I happen to have his phone right next to me, and I can set it up right now, and you can do it in this Fei Qian system. Because to clarify what I was saying before, $50,000 a year is I think it's one of the capital flight restrictions in China. So let's say this is a real case study. Somebody I know sold a house somewhere in Beijing, and I don't know, it was probably $400,000. Right? It was, or more, who knows? Beijing, a house you've owned since the 90s, could be worth a lot. So that house gets sold, you have all this money in a Chinese bank account. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can transfer $50,000 a year. What you can also do is call your friends who aren't transferring money back to another country, and you can say, hey, if I give you $51,000, can you transfer 50 of it to my friend in Canada? And you do that with 5 of your closest friends. Suddenly you've got all your money, and your friends are very thankful because you just paid for their entire, Christmas season or whatever with the little commission that they got. And so but you have to trust them because they can also go, thanks for the money. I'm not transferring this, sucker. Right. So you have to really trust these people to do that. But there's whole networks of people that do that essentially for a living. Right. I mean, if you can earn an extra $1,000 a year doing this, these people don't want that gravy train to stop. And they certainly don't want to get kneecapped by Chinese gangsters either. So they're going to do it that way. And that is very common. So Fei Chen makes perfect sense, right? If I've got to do a bunch of transactions like that, I don't want to have to count on 300 different people to do it. I just want to get it done. And Fei Chen's the way to do it. But are drug cartels not using this? I mean, it seems like I say should be. It seems like they would be using this.
Yeah. I mean, the whole, to bring it up to where it is today, like the whole modern history of Fei Chen is basically bumping up the system by a series of blunders or missed opportunities by the authorities, either in the US or China. I mean, I guess we're going to mostly talk about those two countries because we're talking about sort of, we'll be talking about how cartels use them as well to
Canada,
sort of
I know, I did a show on this a zillion years ago. But basically, like, real estate in Canada is bought up with a lot of Chinese funds that have been transferred. Yeah. And then they take fentanyl money locally, and then that's the money that they use to buy the real estate. But it's basically transferred back and forth. It's not necessarily the Chinese people who buy the house who are selling the fentanyl. It's just that gangs who have fentanyl money, they move it into real estate by using the Fei Chen system. This reporter in Canada uncovered that. So that's one of the reasons why there's so much money off the books. And they literally will walk into a laundromat and there'll be like $400,000, $500,000 on the floor of this laundromat.
It's fully insane. I mean, like, so you get this. It comes into the public consciousness in the 90s, right? Because there's this famous case of a woman called Sister Ping, who's a so-called snakehead. She's like smuggling people into New York's Chinatown from Fujian in China. And she gets rumbled with one of her ship's grounds off the coast of, I think, Queens. And a bunch of people die, and it's big news. And it turns out that she's been using Fei Chen to get money to smuggle people illegally into the US. So it becomes like a news story for a short while. But in 2001... when the World Trade Center is attacked, then the US focuses not on Chinese stuff, but on stuff coming out of the Middle East and Hawala networks, which it believes are funding like Al-Qaeda and whatnot, which they are. And so flying money literally flies under the radar. And it gets another boost in 2007 when, like you say, the Chinese Communist Party is trying not to leak cash out of the country, so it slaps this $50,000 sort of personal limit on how much money you can transfer, and that kind of gives another incentive to use informal banking networks, right? Like you say, it just kind of like gives the Fei Chen networks another boost, and so now you get to this point in kind of 2010, 2015, when fentanyl is becoming a huge issue in the States. Meth as well. Just the general power of the cartels to flood the US with drugs is just an all-time high, whether it's coke, meth, or anything else. So they realize at that point, the Sinaloa cartel, let's say, for example, that they don't have to use their friend in Panama City or Bogota anymore, who's taking like 15 to 20% off the top of every single money laundering deal that he's making. There's these Chinese guys. And by the way, Chinese community in Mexico has been there a very, very long time. And they were very instrumental in early marijuana smuggling, like going back over 100 years. So they're very embedded, and they get into Fei Chen. And then the cartels realize, well, why are we doing it over here? We could just be using the Chinese and, use them with their own system. And so you get this increasing synergy between the cartels and Chinese professional money launderers who are just rocking up in Mexico City and whatnot. And so then this is now, I mean, I spoke to some people for an article I wrote a couple months ago, and they said it could be a $2 trillion industry, Chinese money laundering alone. And with the amount of unknowns there are, I mean, this is all, a shadow economy, right? It could be way, way, way more. I mean, the cartels are almost unilaterally using Chinese money laundering techniques now. There is no point using any other stuff. And like you say, they're just like pumping money into real estate. In Canada, I think Vancouver, right, is like a huge place for this. Toronto is also massive. Sydney in Australia, I think they've got a big problem with this. I don't know if you've seen there in downtown. I was in LA in November, and there's that huge tower block in downtown LA. It got like shuttered, and it's now covered in graffiti. It looks kind of weird.
What is that? What is that thing?
That is a Chinese money laundering story as well. I think a lot of that money was bought with drugs. So it's like it's now become so big that it's visibly there in major cities, right?
I saw that and I couldn't believe it. Was like it's like a symbol of how screwed LA is.
Yeah.
it's like a skeleton of a skyscraper that is just covered in graffiti, and you're like, wait a minute, they're just not working on that. I mean, that's something out of North Korea, an unfinished skyscraper that's just a concrete hulk.
It's like
and
that
is
thing in
ugly on the
Caracas,
skyline.
right?
Yeah, it's so gross, and I'm like, can we do something about this? For God's sake, it's just the blight is ridiculous.
Yeah, and so I mean, side note, DTLA now, wowee. I remember going there like 5 years ago, but it's like an actual war zone now.
It is.
So this gets to the nub of what is going on, right? And this is why I'm saying that the incentives are all kind of skew with and back to front. So you would think, and I think it was talked about during the Biden years that like this is a great chance for cooperation with China, right? Because on the face of it, we want to stop the fentanyl ODs. China also wants to, build a bridge, wants to try and help the states out in a sort of moralistic way, but it's pretty, cheap to do for the Chinese. So it will be an easy diplomatic win. And for America, we can help the Chinese keep their economy afloat by stopping all that money coming out of the Chinese economy. So, you've got Janet Yellen going over there and eating psychedelic mushrooms and going, hey, I'm best friends with the Chinese now. And we're going to help each other on money laundering laws because, it helps both countries. And by the way, it stops terror networks. I mean, whatever the hell they mean by that. They're talking about Hawala again. But actually, when you dig below the surface of those incentives, they're the other way around because they can talk all the talk. But at the end of the day, the Chinese want chaos in the US, and chaos is being caused by the cartels and drugs. And the Americans would like nothing more than for the Chinese economy to collapse and the CCP to go under. So it makes it even worse, right? Because they're talking about and they're committing funds to not busting it. So actually... Right. The appearance of law enforcement is actually providing cover for it to become even bigger.
Yeah, that's it's so ugly. It's really it does make perfect sense, right? This serves the U.S. to have Chinese capital flight, but then China's like, well, cool, we're not going to stop the fentanyl thing because it doesn't make, it's no skin off our nose. And if you're getting a bunch of dead people and drug cartels and violence, like, good, we want that. The U.S. State Department estimates something like 154 billion in illicit funds a year pass through China. It's probably more than that now. That estimate is a couple years old. 154 billion. So that's a fraction of it. China launderers have emerged as the number one underwriter of drug trafficking in the Western Hemisphere. So that means they're not doing the trafficking themselves, but they're laundering the money from drug trafficking. It says the Chinese government is at least tacitly supporting the laundering activity. It's hard to say, though, right? Is it state sanctioned? Because China is actually corrupt in general. A lot of people don't realize that. It doesn't necessarily seem like that, but it is, especially at the higher levels. So you get crackdowns on things, but it doesn't really matter. And it becomes really hard to separate official state policy from just sort of generalized criminal activity.
Yeah, and I get like every time that you have a kind of totalitarian state to whatever degree, you can, if you're on the other side, if you're in, the Treasury or whatever in Washington, you can easily say this is state sanctioned just because everything in China ostensibly is state sanctioned, right? Because the state is all powerful. But like you say, I mean, the level of corruption in China is huge. They know full well that if they busted a bunch of these like flying money networks, the whole small economy, like mom and pop restaurants, whatever, they would collapse, and then you would have a massive problem on your hands. So they can't just go in and bust all of these guys. They have gone in and sort of gone after some of the high-level corruption in the financial institutions, the Chinese. But again, the incentives don't really work. It still makes money for the CCP. So I don't really see a way that they can stop it, to be honest. I mean, the problem is the drugs for Americans. That's where you want to. That's the bottleneck you want to get. Not really. You can't really strangle the money transactions. Well, they're not even transactions.
That's right. I asked my federal prosecutor buddy. I said, "Is this illegal?" And I basically explained Fei Chen, and he's like, "Huh." No money's actually moving. Da, da, da. And he's like, well, what? And I said, okay, you're a federal prosecutor. How do we go after these people if we're working together? And he goes, I would look for weird declarations violations where it's like, hey, you're technically importing over $10,000. Even if you're not actually bringing the money in, you're technically doing it. It's constructive. And he's like, but would a judge really believe that? It's kind of not the same thing. And then he said, we'd probably actually go after not even the individual clients or even the drug cartels who are doing this, unless we can find them and we can prove that they know they're laundering money, then it's money laundering. But if it's just like a Chinese kid who's going to college in Vancouver and he's buying a $3 million apartment and his family sent him the down payment and the mortgage payments via Fei Chen, it's not really money laundering unless you could prove that guy and his family knew that this was laundered money, which they wouldn't know because the Chinese gang's not like, hey, launder some of our fentanyl money. Here it is. I mean, they're just saying, here's how your parents send you money. The only real thing that they can do is go after these little technical things. And of course, my friend said the best case scenario off the top of his head was going after the literal Chinese restaurant or laundromat where they're holding the money and saying, you are dealing in a financial service without a license, so we're shutting you down. But like, that's not a crime where everybody involved goes to prison for 15 years, right? That's like a don't do it again. You're on probation and you're getting a 90-day jail suspended sentence and blah, blah, blah. And then the person's like, cool, my cousin's doing this now out of his garage. Right. It's just
and there's like
whack-a-mole.
I think what's the term, like smurfing? I think they call it, where
smurfing.
You would get like a bunch of Chinese students, all of whom can max out the 50 grand, like you said, and you end up, then you can take 1 million out of the country because you've got like 20 students or whatever, and they don't know anything. They're just literally selling their limit. Like that's all they're doing. They don't know anything about the stuff. You can't prosecute them. You can't prosecute the guys in China. I mean, it's almost impossible. You have to go for the cartels. You have to do the hard bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, even if you got money couriers in Canada and the U.S., you're busting a kid who's 18 and an engineering student. He's got a duffel bag full of $50,000, and he says, "My friend's uncle's cousin told me to go pick this up and drop it off at a restaurant." Yeah. What are you charging that guy with? Being a dumbass? Right, that's it. You got nothing, man. And then you go after that person. Yeah, this is money from my family in China, and I needed somebody to drop it off at the restaurant because I'm really busy and I trust this kid, and I wanted an excuse to give him $500. Okay. Yeah. There's just no crime here that you can prove without a ton of work and no ROI.
Yeah, there was a great actually Politico piece from I think a couple years back about one guy who's a Mexican Chinese national, and he had done some crazy stuff, and he was sitting on like tens of millions of dollars that he was directly liaising with the Sinaloa cartel. Okay, buddy, we got you. Like you're doing the money laundering, and he's gone down for a while. He's screwed, but beyond that, there's really not a lot that you can do. And I mean, the good thing is, I guess, from an American's perspective, that fentanyl deaths are down a lot in the last year.
Didn't know that.
So something is working either on harm reduction or strangling the supply at the border. But I think it's around 75 to 80,000 people dying per year from fentanyl ODs. And now, of course, like it's not being made in China; it's being made in Mexico by the cartels using precursors from China. So that step of the process has been taken out of the game as well. So it's not all bad news. Like there are some wins being made by law enforcement against the drug issue, but the money thing is going to continue going for God knows how long.
By the way, the episode I did about this was episode 677, Sam Cooper, about the real estate and the Chinese Fei Chen and the fentanyl cash. That was episode 677. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. Sean, thank you so much, man. North Korea, Chinese money laundering, meth, just a typical Tuesday here on the Jordan Harbinger Show, I guess.
It's been a pleasure. Always nice to talk about the darker sides of the world.